The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
Welcome to Middle Tennessee State University. We're in the Center for Educational Media in the College of Education, and this is the first SPED Collaborative Summer Academy. We welcome all of these Tennessee educators in the room here to come today and meet each other and learn together in the SPED Collaborative Summer Academy. So before we get started for this session of special education teachers, I'd like to introduce Dr. Melinda Hirschman. Dr. Hirschman is on staff in the Center for the Study and Treatment of Dyslexia here at MTSU. Who is aware of that center here on campus? Okay, so Dr. Hirschman is just going to give just some brief remarks to let everyone know what happens in the center.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I appreciate having the opportunity. I'm serving on the SPED Collab Advisory Committee, and it's been my pleasure to work with our team behind the scenes to bring these events to life. So thank you for your work on the collaboratives and getting us here together. So happy to have just a minute to tell you about this center. I'm glad that there's some of you who are familiar with that, but we are a standalone unit of the College of Education. We've got our very own building over there on the edge of campus. Really have four real missions that are driving our work at the center. One of them is to collaborate with school districts for professional learning events, and I'm often going into schools and districts to give professional learning on literacy, dyslexia, foundational reading skills, and it's always just a fun time to do so. We also provide professional learning events here on campus, often in collaboration with the LRC, where we bring in national experts on literacy topics. I don't know if you're familiar with our Fox Reading Conference, but it's a wonderful biannual, every other year event where we have just tremendous speakers. And of course, during the pandemic, we've all expanded into online offerings as well. 2 years ago, it was fun. One day I was in upstate New York meeting with a team of teachers, the next day in Pennsylvania, and then another day here in Tennessee. So we've expanded our reach that way as well, and bring in some of our speakers remotely now, in addition to being online. You're probably familiar with our evaluation services. We're a very small staff of 5 or 6 folks, about 3 of us who are regularly doing the student evaluations and serving the entire state of Tennessee, so we have a limited capacity to do so. Part of our mission is to meet with educators in the school system and help them develop their capacity for identifying students at risk of or with characteristics of dyslexia using the mandates that the Tennessee laws have put forth. So we do have that service as well, and then we also are fortunate to have Tim Odegaard as our Chair of Excellence there at the center, who's in the midst of robust research programs as well. And that's where we got to know Tammy Hutchings, who will be our next presenter, or our first presenter this morning. She just finished her doctoral program and defended her dissertation. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that, successfully, so we're really proud of her. And proud of the work that she's done at the center and the research that she has been a part of as well. Please know that we are a resource here in the state for all of you. We work with literacy and professional learning in the core, tiered intervention, special education. We often have tutoring groups on site as well. If you'd like to observe structured literacy instruction at work in the small group intervention setting, check in. Right now we don't have a tutoring group, but very often we do. I'm a certified academic language therapist, and we have another COUT, is that acronym, on staff that also does tutoring in the center. So we've got lots of services, lots of fact sheets on our website and practice guides and ebooks. So please know that we are a resource to you, and I hope you'll use us. So welcome today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Laura.
I would like to officially introduce, and I think maybe it's the first time she has been introduced as Dr. Tammy Hutchings.
Thank you.
Am I correct that you recently defended?
I did a couple weeks ago, and I finally turned in my dissertation, finished this week, actually Monday. So
Congratulations, Dr. Hutchings.
thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So again, I am Tammy Hutchings. I am a speech language pathologist. I work at an elementary school with Murray County Schools. And my school serves pre-K all the way to 4th grade, because in our county, elementary school ends at 4th grade, and then 5th through 8th is our middle school. So I worked at the elementary school for a few years. I've had other experiences in other districts as well, and I've done a whole lot of different areas in speech pathology. And I'll refer to myself as an SLP, speech therapist. All the names are interchangeable. So a little bit about me personally. Like I mentioned, I just finished my doctoral degree. It took me 5 years to complete it, so I'm thankful to be finished. I am married, been married for 18 years. My husband's also a speech pathologist. However, we met in graduate school, and he decided he did not want to work with children. He wanted to work with adults only. So he specializes in dementia and the brain changes associated with Alzheimer's. We have 3 kids. One is 16. He's learning how to drive, which is extremely stressful for me, and for me to be the one in the car with him. We have also two 11-year-old twins as well. And I live south of Columbia on a farm. We have lots of chickens, 3 cats, which now my husband says is enough. No more adopting stray animals, and all kinds of reptiles that my kids have acquired over the years. So that's enough about me. We'll go ahead and get started So the agenda today is to talk about what an SLP, what is our role in the schools, and how we can collaborate with our special education partners, our general education teacher partners, and we can collaborate in a variety of different ways. We can collaborate with AAC, which is alternate augmentative communication, those communication device or sign language. We'll unpack that a little bit later. How we can collaborate on behavior, speech sound disorders, and also how we can partner with literacy development. So the role of the SLP, I won't go too much into detail, because in the school systems, we are doing screenings, we're doing evaluations. We're the only school personnel where we are wearing both hats, with evaluating and also being the service provider and being the case manager. So we get to wear both hats with that. We do report writing. We collaborate with our SPED teachers on IEP development and progress reports. I feel like we do those every 4 weeks. We're always doing progress reports, which also takes a lot of collaboration as well. We attend meetings, lots and lots of meetings, sometimes long meetings. And we collaborate with other professionals, our paraprofessionals, our SPED teachers, our general education teachers. And when you think of an SLP, we provide therapy to improve communication, which is, you think of the speech sound problems, language. Sometimes they have stuttering or disfluency of speech. Very rarely some voice problems as well. But what my doctoral training has taught me is that speech pathologists are also your partners in literacy development. Language is so crucial for reading development, and we are the ones that are specialized in language development, and I just see how important language builds that foundation for reading skills. It's very important our kids have strong language skills to build their reading skills on top of. So what does it mean to collaborate? In getting ready for this presentation, I asked some of my counterparts at Murray County School SLPs, what does it mean to collaborate? How do you collaborate at your school? So some of the answers were working together to achieve the maximum potential for our students. We all want our students to do the best that they can. Building relationships with other professionals, of course. Communicating progress and successes. So one story is, last year we have a 3rd grader who I see for speech. He's also seen the SPED teacher for reading problems. And he was recently starting to do really, really well. So we wanted to celebrate his success. He was finally be able to code constant vowel constant words. He's really that far behind, but he was really starting to get it. So I had him I was talking to his special education assistant What level is he on? We brought in some books that were on his level and just kind of let him shine for a little bit. So I think it's important that we're all communicating, which can be hard, we're as busy as we are, to communicate when our students are having these successes, to celebrate them and just be aware. And it can be beyond reading. It could be they're having a good week with behavior management, they're doing really good in different areas as well. So how collaboration can take place. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. We can collaborate in just a variety of different ways. Evaluation results is one, and this is something that an area I'm continuing to improve on. We do the initial evaluations, we do the reevaluations as well, and last year I had a student who is in the pre-K. We have 3 special education preschool classrooms at my school, and I had this adorable boy who, I'll call him George, which is not his real name, but George was up for a reevaluation, and I did his language evaluation. I knew he was still going to struggle, he'd still meet eligibility. His special education preschool teacher let me know too, like he's struggling with language. And I did his evaluation and found he's really struggling with inference making based on this assessment I gave him. I gave him 2 different tests, of course, and he's really struggled with making inferences. So I wrote a goal and we presented the results to his parents, and then the teacher said, you know, I think that he's actually doing pretty well with making inferences, because in the classroom they do a book unit a month, and he was top of his class with making these inferences, making predictions. So it got me thinking, not to get too tied to what my evaluation says, but to also communicate also with that teacher, which we do some. We need to do more of that, is communicating, this is what little George is struggling in, and do you also see this in the classroom? Because the tests are also, don't tell you everything, of course. So we do communicate with the teachers about what we're seeing, but I think that needs to take place a little bit more in depth, just from my own experience. We also collaborate on goal writing. Sometimes I've gone in IEP, I wrote some goals, the special education teachers wrote some goals, and they were the same, especially when it comes to comprehension, because I like to work on comprehension, and resource teachers do as well, and we both wrote comprehension goals. So I'm thinking we need to talk a little bit more about what we're going to focus on in our IEP. We can also collaborate in sharing materials, using the same leveled raters they're using, the same kind of books, same materials, same vocabulary, and discussing progress, like I mentioned before, and also troubleshooting any issues we might have. Are they struggling with comprehension? Is there some aspect of language we need to focus on that we can work together to figure out what part of comprehension they're struggling with? And we're going to unpack that too a little bit later on. And behavior too. We can troubleshoot a variety of issues together. So we're going to talk next about AAC, augmentative and alternate communication. And I should not have put device on here, because AAC is not just using a communication device. It's any way that you're augmenting speech. They might not have any speech, they may be primarily nonverbal. It's any way beyond speech that we're getting the child to communicate. So different types of AAC, like I mentioned, it can be sign language, it could be the communication devices. In our preschool classroom, a lot of our students come in, they've already gone through early intervention, so they have some basic sign language. They might be using some pictures to communicate. And often, if they don't have a device, we're teaching them that cause and effect of communication. We can use sign and also augment that with the Go Talk, if you remember the little Go Talks. We use those a lot in preschool. They're pretty simple communication devices. I'm not here to endorse a specific device, just telling you what we use at our school. And the Go Talks start with 4 buttons, different overlays, all the way up to 9, and we can collaborate on how can we best set that up for our students. And also, this is a snapshot over there, SnapCore. Again, I'm not endorsing a particular type of communication app. I am familiar with SnapCore and also Proloquo, and some of our students come in with already a device that their private SLP has already gotten for them. And we just collaborate with them as well on getting that customized for their school life, not just their home life as well. And I mentioned pictures too, and it doesn't have to just be picture exchange communication system, but any variety of pictures. I've been using pictures to teach them pronouns, my turn, your turn, because our kids on the autism spectrum, and even kids with language impairments, it's just so hard to teach those pronouns, mine, yours, my, your. So for collaboration for AAC, we work with you to identify what vocabulary does a student need to have in their device or have sign language or pictures. So we'll talk with you about what kind of curriculum vocabulary. This is an example of, in the pre-K room, it's a lot of, they did a unit on farm animals, so incorporate that into their device. Also, we want to make sure we use their specific wants and needs. what gets them going, what cranks their tractor, so to speak. What are they excited about? They're excited about candy, cars, bubbles. One kid freaks out about bubbles. He will work all day long for bubbles, for cars, whatever it is. So teaching them or having that in wants and needs, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I want a break, no, all done. And then social phrases too are very important. The my turn, the your turn, my name is. In our preschool room, in their preschool room, they do a circle time where the child has to say, my name is. And if they can't verbalize that, they need to have some way to communicate that, either through a very basic device like a Go Talk, a more advanced one like one here. And then using peers for support. I like to get the peers involved because in our preschool room, it's a typical peers and it's the special education students as well. So we want to incorporate the peers to learn the sign language with the students and also help them use their device to communicate. So we'll just take a quick reflection, just if you want to share. If you don't want to share, that is fine too. And I talk a lot about pre-K, but of course this is beyond preschool age, of course, using AAC. And actually we're going to have a student that starts this school year in 3rd grade. He's transferring from another school and he has a device. He has autism and he's primarily nonverbal. So everyone at our school, the school age kids are going to have to learn how to, because they haven't really had a lot of experience with students who use a device to communicate. So this is going to be a big learning curve for our school. So anyone want to share any ways that you work with students with AAC or you work with your SLP in AAC or anything that I've not mentioned that you want to bring up?
I have an autistic student, and the SPED teacher and I collaborate with pictures because he is nonverbal, and we will get together to figure out what pictures we'll need and how she's wonderful about making those picture books for us. And so I appreciate my SPED teacher, my speech pathologist, because she is invaluable to our department.
Great, love that. Yes.
Hi, I'm Melissa from Germantown. So we use AAC even if kids can communicate. A lot of times in behavior, they need a visual, and so we'll use AAC to do first and then, or to do picture schedules. So it's not necessarily just kids that verbally can't communicate, but they may have another area in which they have a deficit, and so the AAC works well in that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm also a speech language pathologist, and I've worked in the city schools and around Rutherford County a lot. One of my favorite things to do with AAC devices is once a student has been, they're comfortable with it, is to allow them to be leaders. And we've done that through things like allowing them to lead the Pledge of Allegiance and programming them to ask the questions in the morning meetings, so that and the kids love it, and to watch their confidence build, and they get so excited with it. And so we're always looking for ways that they're not just responding, but they're asking, and they're the initiators of communication as well.
I love that. Great. Great input. Oh, and one more thing about AAC. There is a lady in SLP in my district that she is really versed in AAC. At her school, she has more the severe kids with disabilities and communication issues. I want her to do this presentation with me. However, her schedule would not allow it, but she is amazing at implementing AAC at her school. So I'm going to talk briefly about behavior management. I am not a behavior expert, but we do know that behaviors can arise from communication problems with our special needs kids. So we can work together on behavior management and this is again not an exhaustive list, just some ideas, developing social stories, and also really focusing on the language of social stories. My counterpart, Ashley, at our school, it's a bigger school with a lot of higher needs, and we have 2 full-time speech therapists, which is not really, you don't see that a lot. We have a lot of kids in our caseload, so we both manage those. I also serve Head Start too, so I'm kind of pulled in another direction as well. But language of social stories, my counterpart, Ashley, she does a lot of this, working with the pre-K teachers on developing social stories. We want to make sure too that the language is, oh, don't you love this picture? This reminds me of some special friends we have in our preschool program, or even our older kids too. She reminds me of one particular student. So making sure that the language fits that child's development, making sure it's there to extinguish behaviors we don't want to see, but also making sure that language is appropriate. So being mindful of the language, the sentence structure we're using to develop these social stories and working together across the school setting. And you mentioned your behavior charts. Those are great. We work with those with our teachers, and also in general education. We have a child who's struggling, and again, my counterpart Ashley is really good about making these behavior charts too for our general education students that just might need a little bit of help, or our special education students that might need some help in the general education classroom setting to stay on task. Those things like task charts, first then boards are great. And I try to use the same behavior charts that the teachers are using in our special education rooms, or using first then boards. I want to implement that as well. If we're using a task chart to maintain behavior, I want to do the same kind of thing in my room so it's very consistent. So consistency is key for our behavior kids. We also want to identify communication breakdown. When there's a behavior, we want to try to figure out what happened. Was it a result of language? Is there a communication piece to this? Some of our younger kids, or even our older kids with severe disabilities, they can't communicate like we want them to, or that they can. So if something happens, they got hurt, something's wrong, they can't always communicate that, so they break down. So it's very important to figure out, is this a communication piece? And also be mindful of the language that we're using, the complexity of our language too. Some students aren't able to process language, and we have to be just mindful of how they're processing. We might throw out, and I can talk really fast, and I can throw out a bunch of rapid fire questions. I have to stop myself and say, wait, stop. Just give them time to process. And also thinking about when we're giving directions, are they in smaller steps? Are we allowing them time to process? I had one student who really struggled with the spatial concepts, prepositions, and I watched him in his resource room one time, and he did not understand in front, behind, between. The teacher's asking him to go get something for her, and he just wandered around the room aimlessly. I thought, whoa, we have a problem with just these basic skills, those spatial concepts. So speech sound disorders. We can definitely collaborate with our kids that we share on our caseload that have these articulation. Of course, speech sound disorders, articulation impairment, speech impairment, these are all synonymous. And speech errors can be caused by different reasons. We might have kids with motor planning problems, that apraxia of speech. I don't see it very often. We have had a child who was pretty severe. They know what they want to say. They can't plan those movements. Structural problems, cleft palate, cleft lip. Sometimes they've sucked their thumb for too long, they've used a pacifier too long. We have this gap with our teeth, that tongue is just sticking right through, the interdental list, where they had that sound. Sometimes it might lateralize the sound, you hear that slushy sound as well. And then sometimes it's just an articulation problem. They just have trouble with vowel R's, for example, or any other sound, they just have these difficulties. And 2 out of 3 of my kids have had some speech issues as well. And phonological processes. These are the students that will do those sound substitutions, but they're very consistent with their sound substitutions. It's their own little rule system that they have. And that's why you can interpret them pretty easily once you figure out what are you substituting that sound for. And we see this a lot. For example, the W for L, it's not a ladder, it's a WADA. If they have an R problem, it's a WADA. W for L, W for R is a real common one, so it's not a wabbit, it's not a rabbit, it's a wabbit. And once you kind of crack that code, you can figure out what they're trying to say. It's just that's their faulty rule system for sounds. And a child can have a combination of different reasons why they're having trouble with their speech. They could have a phonological process, sound substitutions, they could have just problems with the vowel R sound, they have structural problems, they can have all these. And sometimes speech problems often are just a speech problem. They're not with any other disorder. But approximately 25% of our kids who have speech sound disorders are also having problems with reading. So often on our caseloads, we'll share kids who are SLD, specific learning disability, and basic reading or reading fluency, and also they're coming to me for speech. And sometimes in 25% of the times, they're having these phonological processes. This is a symptom of something bigger, some problems with their phonological structure, the ability to analyze sounds. So what I've been doing now, when I get a younger student, kindergarten, first grade, they're having some of these articulation problems, I'll take a deeper dive look at their phonology, which they are doing that. The programs now in schools with reading are really heavily based on phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. But I also want to look a little bit deeper at those students who are having speech sound problems that are younger, and I'll ask the teacher too, when they get referred for speech, what tier are they in? We're looking at the RTI model. Are they in a tier? Are they struggling with letter sound fluency, letter naming fluency? We have some red flags. And I'll even share with Miss Maloney, one of our SPED teachers who covers K through second grade. I say, hey, this little kiddo might be on your radar. He's on our radar to look at, so let's just be really looking closely at his development when reading. So different ways we can collaborate with speech sound disorders with our kiddos. What I like to do is provide a visual cue for correct sound production. I'll show you what that looks like next. I have on my whiteboard different hooks with different letter cards and sound. They're tied with the letter and a visual cue, and I'll have them. It's important that I say, what are you working on in speech? I don't want them to look at me and say, I don't know. Because I'm like, no, that's not a good answer. You need to know what you're working on when you come in my room so we can have better carryover once you leave my room. So I have these letter cards. And this is something we could work together on if we share a student who has speech problems, as we can also have the same visual cues for your room as well. And it doesn't take much. I just kind of tap that card and say, remember how you make that sound? Especially those S's, the more visual sounds. Some sounds like R production is not as visual. It's harder to teach, but those sounds like S, Z, L are more visual. We can also use your current, ask them about their target sound, making sure that they know what they're working on. We can also incorporate your sight word list. So you have sight words you're working on. If I can look at that and figure out they're working on this sound, that sight word has that sound, I'm gonna use your sight word list in my room so we can work on that reading and work on that speech production as well. Also using your vocabulary words from your unit, your book unit, whatever you're doing for vocabulary, we can use those, find those target sounds, work on those. One of our speech therapists in the district, she has a speech folder. I have not done this before. It seems like a good idea. So she's showing me an example of, she'll have a speech folder, she'll give it to the special education assistant. When they have some downtime, like they have a lot of downtime, right? They'll pull out that folder and they'll work on those skills, which is a pretty good idea. Again, we can also collaborate with using books, your reading materials. They can highlight the aired sounds in reading passages. And this is an example of some of the letter cards that I use. I will laminate these, I connect them together with a key ring, and I hang them up. They grab them when they come into the speech room. This is an example of what I show them. I'll just have it on the table for them to look at and just reference. If I see little Elena is sticking that tongue out too far, I'll just kind of tap her picture as a reminder, like, where do you keep that tongue? And she goes right back to what she should do. Same thing for Z, because Z is just a noisy S, basically. It's made the same way, just your voice is on for Z. And L2 is more visual, so I'll kind of tap that card too. And it's funny, because when I use these visuals, the kids know what the other person's working on. They'll say, oh, Damon didn't grab his L card. I'm gonna go grab it for him. So they know what each other is working on, which is good and can be bad when they try to correct each other. So word list, like I mentioned before, we have sight words. Let's say we have a student that's working on that V. Maybe they pronounce a B for a V. They're not voicing it correctly. So we can use your word list and have them circle it. Find from your sight word list which sound has that V in it, and they can start to circle. And word wall, this looks like a fall vocabulary list. Of course, grandma is not really a fall word, but if we have these words that maybe you're working on from a book unit or whatever you're working on, I can pull those, and if they're working on vowel R sounds, there's lots of vowel Rs, we can have them find those words that have the target sound that they're working on. So this is my favorite part, is collaborating for literacy, because our reading skills are heavily based on our language skills. So kids that struggle with language are going to struggle in areas of literacy. So the very basic component of language is phonology. And again, a lot of our reading programs do really good with this phonology, the phonological awareness, which phonemic awareness is a part of phonology, phonological awareness. We know it's sensitivity to one's sounds in our language. Of course, we know phonemic awareness is now we attach that sound to that letter. I like to incorporate this when I can, especially for my younger students, but I also find that our older students who are struggling readers, they still have a lot of gaps in this phonological awareness that it's not always picked up on. So we want to make sure we still probe those older students who we do share that are struggling readers. Maybe there's still some gaps in this phonology that we want to kind of help fill those gaps. And those kind of skills, they don't take very long, a few minutes each time in our sessions, just kind of build on those. They're all auditory skills that we're doing when it comes to the phonological awareness. So some examples I've done is nursery rhymes. If I can find a nursery rhyme that has a sound that they're working on, I like to include those as well. We'll work on syllable deletion. Again, I just have a book I work through that have these activities. We just do it for a few minutes each time. And I actually think it's kind of fun. So we're going to play a word game and try to make it sound exciting. Blending, we'll do deletion tasks. We'll talk about the phonemic part, identifying initial, final sounds, especially my kids who had those speech sound problems is let's identify words that have your target sound and the final sound. This is the phonological awareness. It should say skills screener. I missed that part of the word called the PASS. This is a free resource. It's pretty easy to find. If you just type it in to whatever web browser you're using, you can readily find it. It comes with a set of instructions. What I've done before, we had a student who I shared with the SPED teacher. He was in 2nd grade, struggling reader. This kid has dyslexia, he has a language impairment, and he has ADHD. So he's got a lot going on. Yes. So with this little boy, his teacher was saying to me how difficult it is for him to learn to read. He's really struggling. I said, let's maybe just kind of look at the phonological awareness. Maybe we're just missing some gaps. We just have some gaps we need to fill. I gave him this screener, and it has just a lot of different phonological awareness skills. It doesn't require any blocks, doesn't require any cubes or anything. It's just strictly auditory skills. And he really struggled with the last set of skills, recognizing phoneme blending, phoneme segmentation, deletion. He just really struggled with those. So I said, this is where he's struggling. So if you work on it, I'm going to work on it too and see if we can't help him just improve his processing of sounds. So reading comprehension. Before we go further, what skills are critical for comprehension? So you think about all the skills, what do you think are the most important ones our students should have a good basis in to comprehend text? And you can shout out anything, there are no wrong answers, just what do you think?
Fluency.
Fluency?
Vocabulary.
Yes.
Good phonics and phonemic awareness.
Mm-hmm. So vocabulary, fluency, phonemic awareness. Any other ideas?
Background knowledge.
Yes, very good. So yes, a lot of skills important for comprehension. We're going to talk about the simple view of reading, but we'll realize quickly that reading is really not so simple. But this is just a nice model to kind of get our minds ready when we think about comprehension. How many of you are familiar with this model? Have you seen it before in other presentations? Okay. So basically, to simplify reading, which of course is not simple, reading comprehension is the product of decoding, word recognition, and then listening comprehension, which listening comprehension is our language skills. So we see from this model, if any part of this equation is in deficit, there's weaknesses, our comprehension is going to be impacted. And we can have students that struggle with decoding, like our students with dyslexia, those who have SLD and basic reading and fluency, they're struggling here. We also have our kids who have language impairments, specific learning disability and reading comprehension. They can be struggling in comprehension with the language piece of comprehension. Sometimes our sweet babies struggle with both, and we have those too. And that's just so much more difficult for them to make progress because we have so much going on that's impacting their comprehension. We're going to unpack a little bit about this next. This is the reading rope. If you've heard about this, Scarborough's reading rope. There's prettier models out there that are colorful. I use just this kind of generic one here. But what I like about this is how it unpacks the simple view of reading. We have the language comprehension or listening comprehension, basically your language skills. You have your word recognition, and we see how much more complicated comprehension really is. We look at these sub-skills. So it's not just language, but language encompasses vocabulary, We look at background knowledge, how important that is. Your knowledge of structures of sentences, how words work together to make sentences. Your knowledge about books. All the different skills that we need for word recognition. And we see how these different strands intertwine, combine into this reading rope. Well, now we have skilled coordination of all these different areas. So we see it takes years to get to that skilled reader. We have a lot of skills we have to be able to do effortlessly, seamlessly to comprehend text. I think what's important too about this reading rope is we see how comprehension is a process. And I used to think of comprehension like a product. This is what we do when we're done with reading. We ask you a bunch of questions. Who's the main character? What's the setting? Why did that person do that in the book? But I realized how much it's a process, that when you're reading, you are doing a lot of different things in your mind. You're not just reading and then I'm going to answer questions, but there's a lot going on when we're reading. We should be very involved in the text that we're reading. So one example how reading is a process is, now that I'm done with school, I've been reading some more just fun books. No more books about dyslexia for a while. I'm just reading fun books. My favorite book I read is Where the Crawdads Sing. So how many of you have read that one, seen the movie? I've not seen the movie yet. I mean, I know how it ends, but if you haven't read the book, I'm not going to destroy the plot for you and tell you what happened. But basically, when I'm reading that book, I see how much it is a process for comprehension. And I'm activating background knowledge. I know a little bit about a marsh. I don't know about her marsh in particular in the book, but I know a little bit about a marsh. I'm incorporating my vocabulary, but I'm also conjuring up a mental model. So when you're reading a book, you're reading text, you're getting a mental model of what is going on in this story. And we want our students to do that too, because that's where we're integrating all these different elements into that skill, that comprehension. So we can see how complex comprehension really is and how a lot of different things can go wrong with comprehension. And we need to work together to figure out what is bringing them down when it comes to comprehension, because it is extremely complicated. The simple view of reading can also give us an idea of our profile of readers. And not to unpack this too much, but we have this four square. We have, if you're proficient in this area, deficient in this area, this is your reading profile, right? So when it comes to dyslexia, or those kids who are on your caseload with SLD and basic reading and fluency, they have the profile of dyslexia. They are typically pretty good at language, those higher level language skills. They're very verbal, they do good with language, higher level language skills, but they struggle with that word recognition piece. So that's your dyslexia profile. Of course, we're not really seeing the typical developing reader, but then we have a mixed type, those kids that struggle with both those sides of the simple view of reading, the language piece, the decoding piece, and that's what makes, if they have a comprehension problem, it makes it tricky because there's a lot going on with them. And we have our kids who have a specific comprehension deficit. They can read to you all day long, they are fluent, they're beautiful readers, but when you go to ask them about what they read, they're just kind of staring at you, the lights are on, no one's home, they're just struggling with language. And these are the kids who really need to figure out what is going on with the comprehension. And we're going to unpack a little bit more about how we can work together on different ways with the comprehension piece. So with collaboration for comprehension, we can use similar materials, same topic, same books that you're doing in your resource rooms, vocabulary from the classroom, and also looking at the sentence structure of reading materials. There's a lot of tricky language in stories. Even what you think might be a very simple sentence is actually quite complicated for our students that we're serving who are struggling with language, with different disabilities as well. And also being aware of the grammar in our stories. We have kids who have language impairments or any other disabilities or struggling with grammar. Let's try to figure out what might be holding them back when it comes to comprehension. So one thing I like to do is build vocabulary, because someone mentioned how important it is when it comes to comprehension. This is some pictures from a unit that our preschool kids were doing. They read The Napping House. If you ever read that, it's a really super cute book, and they pulled a lot of vocabulary. So they do a lot of vocabulary work in their classroom. So when I pull a student from the pre-K room for my individual sessions, I like to take that vocabulary they're already doing in their classroom and I like to do a deeper dive with it. Because vocabulary isn't just how many words do you know, it's your depth of knowledge with the words? How can you connect these words to other words? So I take what they're already doing and just try to do a deeper dive, more in-depth knowledge, and make connections to other words to build that vocabulary, since that's so important for comprehension. So some things I do when I take vocabulary from your unit, so I'll do object function, tell me, and this is of course very simple words, right? Cat, dog, house, very simple. You can tailor this to your older students, your middle, your high school, whatever vocabulary they're working on, we can do the same kind of activities with it. Categorizing, which ones are animals, what kind of group would you put this object into? Define vocabulary in their terms, not just give me the definition from a dictionary. What do you think? Describing what a home is, whatever word it might be. I want you to tell me in your own words, what does that mean to you? What is that? Creating sentences to work on that grammar, sentence structure. Also, comparing, contrasting vocabulary items. And this is kind of a more advanced skill, but you might take a cat and a dog, for example. Tell me how they're alike, how are they different? The student can talk about those differences. Synonyms and antonyms, we might say, oh, a cat feels very soft. What's the opposite of soft? Use those kind of vocabulary terms. Following directions. A lot of my students, even my elementary, older students, they struggle with before and after. They just really struggle with that. So I'll take vocabulary pictures that they already have that they're using. I might say, before you touch the cat, touch the dog picture. And they're like, what? Well, they'll do the wrong order. So I like to do those kind of language activities with the vocabulary that they're already using. And I like to play a game called Describe It. I don't have to use pictures. It could be those more advanced vocabulary they have. I might say, I'm thinking of a word. I'll give them a set of choices. I'm thinking of a word, and I'll describe it, and they have to figure out what the word is. Or we'll flip it around and say, all right, here's the word. You describe it to us so we can guess what it is. So different ways to get in-depth vocabulary knowledge from what they're already doing. So what we'll talk about next is the language of books. Where is the breakdown in comprehension is what we can definitely collaborate on together to figure out. With the language, it can be pretty complex in books. Where is the breakdown? Think back to the simple view. Is our comprehension problems because of decoding and word recognition? Is it language? Is it both? Let's unpack that language piece a little bit further and look at what you're doing so we can figure out together what's getting in the way of comprehension. So we can again work to find that problematic language, look at sentence comprehension. Sometimes students get bogged down at just the sentence level, so we have to be aware of that too. Anaphoras are a fun little term to teach your students, and for a while I was calling this anaphoras, till I realized, oh, I was mistaken. It's an anaphora. So we'll unpack that a little bit more. Grammar, figurative language is in books for our older students, and with autism, they often have trouble with this figurative language, colorful language, interpreting what that really means, not taking it literally. Of course, vocabulary, and then questions. There's a whole hierarchy of how we develop and process questions, what questions are easier than the why and how questions. So we're looking at comprehension, and we'll be also mindful of the structure of the questions that we're asking them. Is it too complex? We need to kind of go back and teach them about why questions, because again, there's this hierarchy of how we develop language skill or questioning skills. So we can work together to find potential roadblocks to comprehension, what's getting in the way. And these are just a sample of some things we can do. We'll do some sample tasks together. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. These are some micro skills that are out in the research that can really impede comprehension, that can be easily overlooked and very easy to use with your current materials that you have in your classrooms. The anaphoras, what's the pronoun reference, and then those conjunctions, those connective words. Sometimes they're called cohesive devices in the research, what's connecting thoughts and ideas together. And again, these are very simple things to implement with our students, and you don't have to go buy a new program. You already have it at your ready. Pronoun reference are those anaphoras, not the anaphora like I was calling it before. So some example would be, this sentence seems pretty straightforward, right? Jack found his dog. Makes intuitive sense. His dog, whose dog? Jack. We can get a little more complicated though. Jack found his dog. He was so happy. We have to think about who was happy, Jack, why he found his dog. So this all makes sense to us as fluent, skilled readers. However, our kids that are struggling with language, they may not get this pronoun referent, and it just gets more complicated. Jack found Preston's dog at the park. He was so happy. So now we have to think about, who is the he referring to? Is it Jack or Preston? So you have to make this mini inference and use your background knowledge to think about the sentence structure. Again, this makes sense to us because who was so happy? He was happy, probably Preston, right? He had the dog that was missing. But our kids who might have ELL issues, they're learning English still, their language impairment, maybe they have autism, Down syndrome, whatever, they might not understand this so easily. And we can see, with just 2 sentences, if we don't get that pronoun referent right, then our whole model of comprehension is just shot. We don't know, now we're in trouble, and it just gets more complicated. Audrey lent her car to Hayden because she missed the train. So now if we have a sentence like that, we have a lot going on. We have this connective word because, we have 2 girls' names now, which we did before too, and the other one, 2 boys' names. She missed the train. We have to figure out who missed the train. Was it Audrey or was it Hayden? So it gets a little bit more complicated, and our students who have struggles with language, they may not understand this. So they're thinking in their head of this model of this sentence, and it can be totally wrong. So this is a quick little exercise that we can do, this micro skill of communication, of comprehension. We can just take a sentence and just break it apart and make sure, hey, here's this sentence. Who is she referring to? And if they say Audrey, well, they're not really inferring that correctly. It's Hayden. Hayden missed the train, not Audrey. So here's another example of how our text just gets a little bit longer. So the example is from the I Survive books. My kids used to love these books. I think they're fun to read. So Cleo threw up all day. There's a good imagery right there. So Cleo threw up all day. Barry tried to help keep her calm, but even he couldn't get her to stop crying. So now we have a lot going on with our sentences. We have a paragraph, but we have a lot going on. So I have to be very mindful of our sentences and making sure they understand who is keeping her calm. Who needs to be calm? Cleo. Mom managed to talk to their doctor who had evacuated to Baton Rouge. He said there was a bad flu going around. Who said there was a bad flu? Who's the he referring to? You can use your background knowledge to know, well, it's probably the doctor. That's more of a medical issue, but if our kids don't have a good, strong background knowledge, they're not making these connections, they're not understanding these pronoun reference. And this is just a paragraph. It's a complicated paragraph. This is probably kids in 3rd and 4th grade are reading this. And if they don't understand who he is referring to, then they're going to be at a loss when it comes to comprehension. So again, these are just skills that are quick to implement. You can write it out on a sentence strip and talk about, okay, who's he referring to and who's she? Who said there was a bad flu going around? And also those connective words, those conjunctions, they're easy to implement as well because they cross different genres of text. We have fiction, nonfiction. They use those connections, those connective words. So we can easily just teach them, make sure they understand that and is when we're joining 2 things together, obviously. But means we're going to signify a different idea, and that's typically true across all genres of text. We know what and means, we know what but means. We know what because mean, that because signifies a cause and effect relationship, then we can infer the boy scraped his knee because he fell off the bike. Why? How did his knee get scraped? Because he fell off the bike. And we may think, well, this is pretty easy, right? But not necessarily for our students who are struggling readers, struggling with language. They may need to be explicitly taught these strategies. And this is something that SLPs and our general education teachers and special education teachers, we can work together to figure out what is tricky about the language of our text. What's getting in the way? Is it these little micro skills that we could easily just implement together? So finally, as a reflection, what are ways in which you collaborate with your SLP at your school? Anybody want to share anything that maybe I didn't mention, that you're doing something really amazing at your school that you want to share, anything that you currently do at your school, how you collaborate with your speech therapist?
I just wanted to validate a lot of the points that you were bringing up. As a former special educator in the middle school setting, I became aware of my SLP because of the variety of students I had on my caseload. And this is a conversation you and I have had personally as well. Often had students that had a language impairment, plus that word level impairment, plus dyslexia. That's a lot of needs coming at you at once, and it was a real relief to realize that the SLP in our building, and she served many, Not as lucky as having 2 in one school. Did I hear that
very
correctly?
lucky.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, we were able to collaborate so that we could break up that big task. And it took me and her working together to understand that she can impact reading as much as I can, and literacy, and that was eye-opening for me. And we really were able to collaborate on IEP goals and progress monitoring and cross-curricular texts and word lists to really try to optimally serve the student.
That's great, yes. So we're there to help each other out. We have kids that have a lot of different issues going on, like the coding, word recognition, reading comprehension problems, language. We need to work together to figure out how can we best serve our students together, and not like you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. No, we need to be working together to really help these students, because as we see, especially when it comes to comprehension and reading, it's so complex, a lot can go wrong at any given time. So we need to be communicating with each other about what can we do to help each other with, especially when it comes to
Can I
the
add
reading.
something really
Sure.
quickly? So when I was in the classroom, I remember feeling a little insecure when I was talking to families. I worked with a lot of students that had more complex levels of need. And I remember having some conversations with families who did not, even at middle school, did not want to allow their child to use any sort of alternate forms of communication, whether it was a device or PECs or something like that, because they said, I know my child can talk. And if we introduce these other things to them, then they're never going to use their voice. And I remember having a conversation with my speech and language pathologist, and she said, no, really, that's going to elicit more communication.
Right.
And I just didn't know that as a new teacher. And so that just sort of changed my trajectory and how I get to communicate with families and say, no, really, let's start early. Let's utilize sign language and PECs and anything else we can do to get more verbal communication.
We're going to end with some resources that are freely available to y'all. We have the foundational skills from the IES to support reading for understanding. It has a lot of great activities in there that are lesson plans you can easily implement with what you're currently doing. Reading Rockets is a great website if you haven't perused that before. It has all kinds of different resources, from vocabulary, phonemic awareness, to, I'm sure I'm missing a lot, fluency. It has so many great resources. The Florida Center for Reading Research is the same. It has all kinds of different aspects of literacy, from phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, comprehension, vocabulary. Very easy, already ready for you lesson plans and activities. Amplify Science of Reading Handbook. I found their podcast a couple years ago. I'm a podcast nerd, so I've been listening to this one. I love it, and you can pick and choose what topics are most relevant to you, the science of reading, and they have a Science of Reading handbook that you can download for free as well. Also on campus is the MTSU Center for Dyslexia. They have a lot of wonderful resources and professional development that you can also peruse their website as well and look what's going on with their center and what different professional development they might have coming up. Again, my favorite podcasts related to reading and language and literacy are See, Hear, Speak. It's a speech pathologist named Dr. Tiffany Hogan. She's really tied in dyslexia, language, and how those all intertwine together. So that's a good one. And of course, I mentioned the Science of Reading podcast as well. So just some free resources, because we all love to get stuff that are free. You don't have to pay for it. So these are great resources just to help build your knowledge base when it comes to reading and how important language is to our students. That concludes my part of the presentation this morning. Do you all have any questions, anything we want to discuss further?
So I'd like to pose something to the group, because we've talked about ways that we've collaborated. Has anyone encountered a barrier in collaborating with your SLP, or any problems or any dilemmas that you have encountered that you might want to pose to the group without revealing any identities or anything like that?
I teach middle school, and the issue we find is not that they're not willing, but they have so many other students and they have multiple schools. So they come in our school for one day a week, they're there for an hour, and our school has 1,400 kids in it. So we don't see them, and they want to do more, they don't have the ability. So we're tied on the time constraints and they have, multiple other schools to get to that day.
You're right, that's a problem, is a lot of, I'm lucky that I get to be at one school, but I also go to the Head Start location, and my counterpart Ashley is there too, so we're very fortunate where we are that we have each other, and we are at one school where everybody knows we're there most days. But yes, that is a problem with too many caseloads. I don't know what the solution is to that problem. It certainly is an issue where we're pulled in different directions, there are multiple schools, or you're just kind of bounce in, especially the middle and high schools seem to be more prevalent where they're kind of in for a little bit and they're going over here. But yes, that certainly is an obstacle to collaboration, of course, definitely.
Oh, I have no strategies, but I am just going to piggyback off of what you said. Our speech pathologist is overwhelmed, and we collaborate. I mean, she is awesome, but in the spring of the year, she's crying, and she's overwhelmed. And so I really don't know what to do to support her, except that we do collaborate, and those students that we do share, I just encourage her, and that's what I encourage any other teacher that's, has that problem. Just give them grace and help in any way you can to support your speech pathologist in your building.
I work in a unique situation. I'm at the School for the Blind, so we have built-in collaboration time. But I was just thinking, sitting here, in situations like that, if it'd be possible to do like a video conference on the computer at a different time, or set up a time to see, because a lot of us are doing virtual things nowadays anyways, and if they're at another school, or maybe carve out a period of time where that collaboration can take place, and just see if they'd be open to it, because I know where I'm at, if I couldn't meet with them face to face and we had the opportunity to do something online, in between students, I think that would be, any little bit would be beneficial versus nothing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. Utilize the technology that we have, that we had to use because of COVID. We had to get familiar with Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and I think that's a great way to collaborate. It's just virtually too. That's a great point.
I love what you said about the fact that you recognize how much your speech therapist wants to do. As speech therapists, we love we love to talk about what we do. We love what we do, and we love working with children, and we love working with the teachers if we're in that education setting. So it is equally as frustrating for speech therapists as well. Some of the things that, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here that could go a lot of different directions, but I always, as a speech therapist, would take on graduate students. That would help me during that time be able to reach a lot more teachers while while I'm training them. Another option are speech SLP aides, and that they can do a lot of the therapy while we do the planning and more of the collaboration with the teachers. And then also, I encourage my speech therapists to meet with teachers. Build that time into your schedule. I know that sounds hard. We used Fridays as kind of those days where we would do more of the collaboration piece, and we fought hard for that, to build that into our schedule, because that is such a need. So we are trying to be advocates as well to help you as teachers to meet the needs of the students. The beauty of that is that it takes a team. And so if from the very beginning we can establish that piece of we're a team working together, then it makes it easier whenever we fail sometimes, whenever we know that at least I've got your back and you've got my back, and we're trying to meet the needs of those students. I love the piece about doing it online and meeting online. Zoom, like you said, has been such a friend to us, with parents as well. And drawing in that piece of communicating with parents. So, and then half the battle is just listening. And that, if we can just pause for a moment and listen to you all, and you guys can listen to us, then it just seems to go so much smoother.
Speaking as a former first grade teacher, me, something you said convinced me that it would be worth my while to work with a speech therapist, and that is, there are strategies in the work of a speech therapist that helps them learn to read. And if teachers understood that part, they might be willing to spend more time collaborating with the SLP, knowing that this work I'm doing, collaborating with them, will have double benefit, and that is, it will help them learn to read. And that really caught my attention. I did not know that until I heard you say it today. So that might be a point of to use in convincing people, let's work more closely together. It will help their reading.
Right, I don't think that's always seen as the SLP is there to facilitate reading development, but until I really got more in depth with literacy, I didn't really realize that too, as a SLP, how important our work is in developing those literacy skills.
I work for the Tennessee Department of Education, and listening to all of you, I just felt like I needed to chime in something that can be of help to SLPs. Our amazing SLP, Susan Essery with the state, runs a communities of practice for all SLPs. And in that communities of practice, SLPs have the opportunity to bring problems of practice and collaborate. And I know one big thing that Susan has done is talk around collaboration at the school level and advocate for ways to do that. Also, really, she's doing a ton of work around retention, which is so important, especially when I heard about your SLP and how hard it is by the end of the year. And so bringing in, raising those issues up so that we can be creative problem solvers together. And Susan is a huge advocate. So happy to connect anyone with her and with that communities of practice that happens year round, so that you can have colleagues to reach out to if you're an SLP. And just also want you to know that she works directly with SPED supervisors as well, and is constantly advocating for a collaboration of SLPs with general education teachers and special education teachers. It's so very needed, but the creative scheduling is that key piece. And so the more voices we hear at the state, the more we can share out your ideas. So if anyone needs me to connect you to her and that, just let me know.
So I'm also in the middle school, and our SLP comes into our ELA classes a lot of times, and we found it really helpful when we do like Socratic seminars and her encouraging students to speak up or to talk about the literature before they're writing, that was a way that we collaborated, and she does a wonderful job of that. So it's not just pulling kids at separate times, but she also goes in and services the kids in their classes and services everybody, so no one knows that who's being pointed out or anything like that.
Right, that's great, especially in middle school. They don't want to be singled out for leaving the room, and it's hard to schedule.
Just seen as another teacher, I mean, because there's already two teachers in there, so.
And when we push in, we get to see what's really going on in the classroom too, what language you're using, what resources you're using. So pushing in is a great way. Of course, that's difficult with scheduling too sometimes, but pushing in really allows us to see the bigger picture and help our students who need help without singling them out, of course.
We have a comment and a question from the viewers. A comment on this issue of dilemmas. An issue I've come across with my SLP is time. A strategy I use to help with this would be encourage each other and email daily if needed on a particular student. So communicating through email. But we do have a question, and this is a sort of a bigger question that came early in your presentation. What program could be helpful to work with adults who have reading as well as speech issues? Any thoughts on that?
So what program will be helpful for adults who have difficulties with
who have reading as well as speech issues?
It's really complicated with adults. It really would have to, I don't have a particular program I'd endorse. It would have to be something that's probably multi-sensory approach to reading, an Orton Gilliam approach to reading. because we don't know where's the breakdown with the reading. And for speech issues as well, I mean, there's many adult speech pathologists too that could help. Again, I don't really know what issues are there that are causing speech or language or just speech, but there's definitely resources there for adults. Outpatient rehabilitation places as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hutchings, you've given us a lot of good stuff today in this presentation. Thank you for being with us, and congratulations on your recent defense.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.